Welcome to the November 18th Eclipse OpenJ9 community call. Seem to have gotten extra text there, so we'll just move that out of the way. Please add your name and affiliation to the agenda so we know who's been joining. And then we'll pause here like we usually do to give everybody a chance, or anyone a chance, to add any topics that they'd like or to raise any concerns or issues. This is not the only opportunity to do this, so if you do think of something, feel free to either chime in as we're talking through the different sections of the agenda, or to add it to the end of the any other business section, and we'll tackle anything added there at the end of the meeting. So this week, we have a OpenJDK method handle related lightning talk. Babneet, are you ready to go with that?
Yes, I'm ready. I have a few more presenters with me. Can they do their mic checks quickly?
Let's see if I can get this to share the right display. Do you see the actual slides, or do you see the presenter view in what I've shared?
I can see the actual presentation, so I think that's good.
Perfect. Then take it away.
Okay, so good morning. Today we will be discussing about adopting OpenJDK's java.lang.invoke package in OpenJ9. Next slide, please. And my name is Babneet, and I have with me Jack, Liqun, and Nazim. Jack and I work on the virtual machine VM component of OpenJ9, and Liqun and Nazim work on the just-in-time compiler, the JIT component of OpenJ9. So what's happening for this project? Currently, OpenJ9 has its own implementation of the invoke package. This means that we implement all the Java classes and the public API. Next slide, please. So this means that we implement all the Java classes and public API for the invoke package. This also requires VM support and JIT support, which translates to a lot of native code. And recently we have found reasons to adopt OpenJDK's implementation of the invoke package. Adopting OpenJDK's invoke package requires new support in the VM and the JIT. The reasons and the newly added support will be covered later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Before that, we are going to cover the basics of the invoke package. As a refresher, the four main components of the invoke package are listed here. The method type class represents a method, specifically the input argument types and the return type for that method. It gets consumed by a method handle, which ends up being one of the core components of this invoke package. And it is a dynamically typed reference to a method, and it allows invocation of those methods it points to. The next element is a var handle, which is a dynamically typed reference to a field or variable. It uses a set of method handles to provide read and write access to the fields or variables it points to. Finally, there's this class called method handles with an S. It contains a lot of public static methods for looking up and creating method handles and var handles. In addition, it provides complex functionality such as to permute arguments or to chain method handles and so forth. This sums up the key components of the invoke package. Next slide, please. Next, we will see the reasons and the newly added support for adopting OpenJDK's invoke package in OpenJ9. It will be followed by a roadmap for this project. And now I'm going to pass it to Jack to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Babneet. Next slide, please. The motivation behind this change is to share a common representation of method handles across the virtual machine and the just-in-time compiler, which removes some of the limitations that we currently have with the existing implementation. In the current implementation of OpenJ9, the virtual machine and just-in-time compiler each has a separate design on how to handle method handle operations. As shown on the slide, VM uses a native MH interpreter to interpret and execute the method handle, whereas JIT would recognize all the method handle methods and create special JIT code to handle them. On the other hand, the OpenJDK implementation uses custom Java bytecode generated from the JCL to handle the method handle operations. As Java bytecode is recognized by both VM and JIT, we do not require any special handling in the VM and JIT design anymore. At the moment, each type of method handle operation would require a new special native code to be added both in VM and JIT. By converting over to the OpenJDK implementation, different operations would just map to different Java bytecodes generated within the JCL and run from the VM and JIT. Hence, there's no actual native support required. Next slide, please. Now I will give an overview of the OpenJDK implementations that we're adopting. In the OpenJDK implementation, it follows 3 layers. From the user's perspective, the method handle class is the core component and is responsible for the operations from the user space. Within method handles, there is a Lambda form class used to generate the custom bytecodes and create a member name class that links to the generated bytecode. And from the member name class, it holds a native reference to the generated code that will be used by VM and JIT to actually invoke the method. From the bottom legend, we can see that only the member name referencing is a native operation, while everything else is done in Java. This removes the large amount of native handling that is required from the existing OpenJ9 implementation. And as Java operations are common between VM and JIT, this enables a lot of performance benefit and others that could be enabled that wasn't possible before. Now I will pass it over to Liqun to discuss the benefit from the JIT side.
Next slide. Thanks, Jack. So there are 3 benefits on the JIT side comes with this change. The first one is on-stack replacement. Next slide. Next slide, yeah. So OSR is a technique that allows a running program to switch to a different version of code. In OpenJ9, we use it to transfer execution from JIT-compiled code to the interpreter. In this example, we have a transition request right before the call to bar. We'll exit the JIT code and resume the thread in the interpreter. Interpreter will start running the backcode at invoke virtual bar. If the JIT code doesn't have a equivalent representation in the interpreter at the transition point, OSR is impossible in that JIT code at that specific transition point. Next slide. So this is a problem for OpenJ9 method handle implementation because the JIT and the VM doesn't share the common representation. So this means we can OSR in JIT compiled method handle frame. This means that while we can do OSR while executing the JIT code compiled for method handle, whether the method handle is inline to its caller or not. And also we can do OSR while executing the inline callee of the method handle because we are still midway through running the method handle and the interpreter doesn't know how to finish the JIT implementation. Next slide. So the solution we have is first we have to prohibit OSR transition in method handle frame. And we also have to abort the compilation when transition requests can be avoided. This can happen in debug mode, where a user decides when to transition. However, this solution has a performance penalty. But with OpenJDK's method handle implementation, OSR is no longer a problem because both the JIT and the interpreter share the bytecode representation. Next slide. The second benefit in the JIT is better performance. So with OSR, we can enable more optimizations. So that will result in more optimized code. And we also get the benefits from interpreter profiling because the method handle is implemented in bytecode now. Thirdly, features implemented in method handle, we expect them to run faster. Features like lambda, string concat, and var handle. Notice that var handle is used in Java util concurrent package, so there should be better performance in concurrent applications like DayTrader. Lastly, dynamic languages like Nashorn and JRuby, they use method handle intensively. We are seeing a large gap between OpenJ9 and OpenJDK. On some JRuby macro benchmark, the gap can be up to 2x. This is due to some inlining problems and OSR problem caused by the limitation of OpenJ9's method handle implementation. Next, I'll pass it to Nazim to talk about other benefit and the remaining of the presentation.
Thanks, Liqun. So one of the challenges that OpenJDK and JIT developers have to deal with is the current method handle implementation requires each method handle method requiring special recognition and special handling. Basically, the IL has to be handcrafted, and this makes maintenance and debugging quite challenging. And the IL that is generated is prone to bugs. And however, with the OpenJDK implementation, every method handle method is just like any other Java method, and it is easier to maintain and debug. And another major benefit is that any community method handle related contributions to OpenJDK is not going to require IL generating related changes in OpenJ9. It can be easily integrated into OpenJ9, and yeah. So can you see the next slide, please? So now that we spoke about the benefits, so here is what we have contributed so far. So we have VM and JIT support for the method type, method handle, and var handles. And we also implemented the new bytecode handling mechanism required for this migration to the new OpenJDK implementation. Next slide, please. And going forward, we are going to be implementing more optimizations to improve performance, and we'll have full testing and perform more performance tuning work. And we will also be adding support for on-stack replacement and full-speed debug, as well as ahead-of-time compilation. Next slide, please. To summarize, in this presentation, we spoke about migrating from OpenJ9 to OpenJDK implementation of the java.lang.invoke package, and the primary motivation behind that being so that we have a common representation between the VM and JIT, and that brings a lot of benefits as we discussed during this presentation. And we also see a lot of benefits from the JIT perspective, such as OSR and better performance, as well as less maintenance. So that is all we had to present today. Thank you very much for attending the lightning talk. And if you have any questions, we will be happy to take them. Thanks.
Thank you all for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask right now?
Do you have a rough timeline for the roadmap?
We are targeting JDK 16, which is March of next year, for enabling it for at least JDK next, which will be JDK 16.
Okay, thank you.
Is the intention, once it's been enabled for JDK Next, to bring it back to the existing LTS releases, the 8s and the 11s?
That is correct. I think currently we have limited build resources, so we decided to only enable it for one version of Java and then stagger it to previous LTS versions. And also we want to make sure performance is met for LTS versions before we enable it for them.
Makes sense. Does anyone else have any questions for today?
You mentioned that there's a different representation for the method handle in the JIT and in the interpreter in the current OpenJ9 implementation, and mentioned that there's a common representation between the two through bytecodes in the OpenJDK implementation. Is there a expected performance loss for switching away from the uncommon to common interface? Are you expecting that the generated code is going from the JIT, say, would be slower? Or is this expected to not have a loss in performance at all?
So currently with the OpenJ9 implementation of using separate representations from post VM and JIT, because we do not require the process of generating the bytecodes from JCL to be run, VM during startup would be able to directly execute a method handle without actually having to do any pre-work in order for it to be common. So we're expecting a slight loss in terms of startup performance.
Okay, so no performance loss expected on the JIT side then.
Right. As for the
Liqun, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jack. Okay. As for the performance on the JIT side, at steady stage, we expect performance gain instead of loss because of the three benefits: the ability to OSR in method handle frame, and the benefit from iProfiler data. So the JIT code should be more optimized.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for giving this talk this week. I will switch back to the agenda and we'll pick up from there. Does everyone see the agenda again?
Yep.
Perfect. So then next week, we will, not next week, sorry, December 2nd, we have another lightning talk coming up from Jason on the new detailed null pointer exception messages. Look at the user raised issues like we usually do to see if there's any recent ones that have come in that need attention that they may not be getting yet. So we have one raised yesterday about an invalid class pointer. It's been sent to the JIT team to take a look at. There was also an article on performance, comparing different JVMs. I know I've put a comment in there, but Marius or Andrew or Vijay, if you were able to take a look at that as well, that would probably be a good thing to get some comments and information into. I'm seeing comments in most of the things that have been opened otherwise. So unless there's something in this list people want to call out for a more detailed discussion, we'll move on. A reminder again about the help wanted issues and beginner issues, that if you do find an issue that would be a good starter place for somebody to get into the project, that you tag it with these labels and then leave it for somebody new to pick up and find their way into the project that way. In terms of the download trends, we take a look at the OpenJ9 download trends. We seem to be coming back up from a bit of a lull there, then sort of a slight increase here. Would have expected a bit more of a bump given the recent releases. So a little surprised not to see a bigger jump here at the end. Take a look at the hotspot numbers. They seem to have gotten a bit more of a bump off the recent release than we have. Any other comments around the download trends?
Maybe this has been brought up in a previous meeting, but would it be useful to display these two side by side normalized so that we could kind of see the relative differences comparatively?
I don't know if we've discussed displaying them in a normalized form. You can see the two graphs together.
Here on the OpenJ9 graph, because the differences are so much smaller comparatively, we lose a little bit of the trend. And we often, I notice in these meetings, compare the trend in Hotspot to the trend in OpenJ9.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Andrew Leonard, I think you've been one of the maintainers of this tool, I believe. Is that something that...
Hi Dan, sorry, I was just distracted then. What was the question?
So Scott had proposed normalizing these trends as well so that we could see the data normalized between the two implementations.
I think this is all open source code, so you could raise an issue in the dashboard repo. I'll put a link here.
Yes, that's what I was suggesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shem.
Then if we take a look at our upcoming releases, we are fast approaching the code split date for the next quarterly release. It's targeted for January, but of course we code split early December. And as people start to take vacations throughout December, we may have less coverage around this. So please, if you do own issues in that release plan, try and get those closed out as much as possible over the next couple of weeks now. We also have the Java 16 release coming up in March of next year. So I have tagged in some tentative dates into here for when we would be targeting to do the code split and the milestone 1 build and milestone 2 build. These are tentative, so if you have concerns with what I've tagged in here or suggestions for how we can change that, please call those out, or we can also discuss that offline. Shelley, if I can hand it over to you for the adopt update.
Yeah, sure. Just to mention that the respins that had to happen this past week are now complete, thanks to everyone who helped to get those out. You can find the issues in the TSE repo. There's also a retrospective issue that covers the original October release and any other items that came up on the respins. So if you have notes you want to add there, please do. We'll actually host a meeting shortly to discuss everything that's in that issue. Also, I think everyone probably is aware, we had originally enabled sanity functional and extended functional tests on AARch64 at the request of the OpenJ9 community, basically because there wasn't the hardware at the OpenJ9 Jenkins server. But now we've actually gone ahead and enabled those tests on all platforms at the project. So we will monitor and sanitize those over the next week or so and report any problems that we find. There's also been a great effort to fix and re-enable a bunch of system tests. So you may see more system test targets running in your builds over the course of the next while. Some of them have been disabled for a while and are being fixed and re-enabled. So we're hoping that this will help increase our test coverage, and you'll see that at the J9 Jenkins as well, since you pick up that test material. Finally, there's an improvement on how we can disable test targets. So we used to have to just comment out variations or modes if we wanted for them not to run. Now there's actually a method in the test target itself to say you want to disable a particular mode. And the reason this is better is we will then have a record of what's disabled and be able to associate it with issues so that when issues then get closed, they can be re-enabled, hopefully automatically. All right. And yeah, just one other note, not really relevant maybe to OpenJ9, but Alibaba Dragon Well pipelines have been added, and there'll be a blog post introducing what Alibaba Dragon Well binaries are, and that they'll start releasing them through the Adopt project as well. That's it.
Thanks, Shelley. In terms of sorry, I should pause there and see if there's any questions for Shelley or for the Adopt group.
Just out of curiosity, is Dragonwell going to be releasing at the same cadence as OpenJDK, OpenJ9, and the various other OpenJDK flavors that are releasing?
Yes, I believe that is the plan. They didn't get into the October release because we had only added one of the versions, but now we have 8 and 11, and we'll cover the platforms. They're not on all the platforms that obviously we have, but that will be planned, but they'll be the same cadence. So it might be a very busy release time for us.
Very cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there an infrastructure update, Adam or Joe?
Not too much to report. We increased the size of the disk at UNB yesterday to handle as much capacity as we have at the main OSU Artifactory. So we shouldn't have any issues running grinders and not having SDKs available. There's one other Windows issue we're still monitoring, but other than that, I think we're smooth sailing.
I should also mention, though, that our machines at UNB will be on and off over the next day or two. This has been posted in Slack, but there's some maintenance going on at UNB, which means their VPN is going to be offline at some point today for probably about 6 to 8 hours. We'll get those systems back online as soon as we can.
Thanks, guys. Then we'll move to the any other business section. Babneet, is there anything you want to call out on the notes here around the method handles work?
Nothing specific. I think the only main thing is we will be enabling builds, or we are planning to enable the builds for the end of November. And others only pending work.
Devin, do you have an update on the CMake migration?
Yeah, the Windows has been switched over to default on JDK 11. As part of that, though, I noticed in the nightly last night there was a test failure that was passing when we were doing the pre-merge tests. So I'm currently digging into that one, see what's going on there. And then also on the internal Jenkins, there's some, I believe, machine misconfiguration issues that are stopping build there. On the ZOS side, I'm making it through the make process now, and I'm just going back and opening up PRs for all my changes there, and then starting to run the full test suite there to see how that does there.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
I closed the issue open, Devin. I think it's a known problem.
Okay.
Marius, is there an update on the Helm and the operator discussion?
Small update. So Chris is continuing to work on the Helm chart definition, and we are in the second round of reviews. He has to make the suggested changes. Things are going slow because Chris is a student on call and he has classes, exams, and whatnot. And moreover, he has double duties as a PMA and Git server deployment student. So things are moving along, but just slowly.
All right, thank you. Scott, Andrew, is there an update on the microJIT progress?
So no immediate update here, other than that tomorrow is our next meeting, and there's a lot to talk about in that meeting, but I won't repeat it all here and then make the next meeting redundant.
Great. Andrew, is there an update on the CANOSP project?
So as far as I'm aware, the students are working away on on getting the code ready for a pull request. I think they're fighting a bug right now that's causing some intermittent failures, but I'm expecting a pull request to open against OpenJ9 utils very soon, imminently. So hopefully that'll probably be the bulk of their contribution. Their project will wrap up in about 2 weeks. So.
I have a generic question about that. So are they subject to the coding standard that we have for JIT, meaning, brackets and all that stuff? Or because this is just something that is not delivered directly to the OpenJ9 repo, can have their own coding standard?
I think we expect something at least resembling what we've got in the rest of the code base. I don't know how pedantic we're going to be on it.
Yeah, I saw that the bracket placement is not what we do in the JIT. That's why I'm asking.
Right. It may match the VM style though, so because there's 2 styles at the moment in OpenJ9.
Yeah, correct.
So. I would imagine that it would be the threshold of reasonableness would be my my feeling, but other committers may have stronger viewpoints on that.
Okay, thank you.
We have the compressed and the default combined mentioned down here, and a question around the test story. You have an update on that? Sharon, are you on the call?
Yep. So all the extensions changes have been merged for the mixed refs builds. The OpenJ9 and OMR changes are currently under review. I'm not sure who brought up the test story a couple weeks ago.
Probably me. I think I asked who was going to handle the duplicate testing, and I think Shelley reminded me that it would be test side, but it wouldn't be a full duplicate because that would be redundant.
Yeah, and I think that a bunch of those changes already went in. I don't know. I don't think Lan is on the call today.
Oh, I'm here.
Excellent. Thanks, Lan.
So I think we have an issue in OpenJ9 to track this. I think there's some changes that need to be going into the all1.csv file to merge them into one. So if you have a SDK ready for us, we can just run some tests. That would be great.
Okay, that sounds good. I can send over something to test with.
Great, thanks.
Then a reminder to please add some items to the stop ship criteria discussion that was opened a few weeks back, probably more than a few weeks now, around the last release and the long delay going into that, where we were determining whether something was a stop ship. Getting that criteria listed out and decided in advance would certainly help those determinations. Are there any other comments or concerns or business we need to handle this week? All right, then, thank you, everyone, and we'll have the next one of these calls next week.
Great, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye.